let's dive into, oops, that's not the agenda, that's the agenda. Okay. So Aharon, Kenric, Philip, Steve. Okay, so no Frank or George today yet. Okay, brief updates from everyone. I'll start to break the ice, just a few minutes. It's very hot here, although it's good to be talking again to familiar faces here. We can talk about the dRep research. I've been flagging assessments, that's what we're talking about. Over to you, Kenric.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So with regard to the budget, as you know, Steve, you made a distribution to me about a month ago of half the budget, and I'm using that to make allocations to myself and Thorsten as the co-editors of the paper. The authors are kind of expected to bring their own resources to the project, but they can talk to me privately if that's difficult. And then we have money allocated for reviewers, which Thorsten and I are starting to work on.
We're going to do a quick update from everyone, Kenric, but that's.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
yeah,
then let's go back because I skipped it.
But we
that's
can.
That's the budget update, and then let's do just an informal update from everyone, not specifically on the white paper itself, but just a check-in of how everyone's doing.
Yeah, I'll make a note of what you just said there. But if you want to go, so go over to you, Thorsten, for a brief update.
Yeah, as I'm in the same country as Stephen, it's hot here too. Hopefully it's getting a little bit cooler. I'm suffering a little bit. On the project side, things are starting to ramp up now. So I reached out to Philip, who's here. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And to George. George didn't respond so far. And we are starting to work also towards ramping up now the reviewers. So there are some activities discussed, but yet not fully executed.
Okay, Aharon, do you want to give a very brief update?
Yeah. Actually, we have here a normal summer, even less hot than the usual. I hope that you get through this. Find yourself in the winter and not suffering too much. I have a very exciting update of a new team member that joined Consensus. Kenric have met him. Omer, his name, and he's came from the background of from complex systems research. He's a PhD in physics, and he starts already working on formalizing our algorithm. So it's a very good input, and in addition to the Consensus teams, they can bring another scientific background and good foundation for our work. So we start working already on formalizing and gathering some citation and some literature.
That's great.
Be used in the near future for our project, and that can be used for this specific effort as well of this dRep white paper.
Great, Aharon. Could you paste his name into chat because I didn't catch it?
Yeah.
But that's great. Steph, on a brief update from you, if you could.
Hello, everyone. Life is good, and well, let's see. Couple of things. Being in touch with Kenric and Seth regarding the bands off index, and two other teammates from my team who are reviewing the technical definition of what we have for bands off index. But that's something I'd like to go in further on the when we go back around to speak about those areas. But otherwise, life is good.
Great, thanks. And Philip, what's been going on with you?
So I'm also in the UK, in London, and it's unbearably hot, like unbelievably hot. So I think I've read by this point pretty much all the papers on on vote delegation and its pros and cons. And I'm writing like essentially the overview and what specifically how what Catalyst is doing fits with the research. And yeah, it's going to be ready definitely before the end of July.
So,
Okay, that's great.
okay, we've done research budget, Kenric, where you just mentioned allocations, distributed co-allocations, money's available, as you say, to community reviewers. There's no real project plan updates. We are continuing meetings. If there is anything, that, things are proceeding smoothly. So I will do monthly report that we're just holding these meetings regularly on the 26th as usual, and that's all going to be routine. So if we go into the meat of the meeting, which is going to be the white paper, shall we proceed through the titles of each paper, Kenric? So I was thinking.
Well, let me give some updates that are more general first. So the goal for July is to have completed drafts of your white paper. Maybe I shouldn't even use the word completed, but a solid draft, which means writing of the section. You know, and again, our target for these sections are kind of between 3 to 5 pages for each section. I think will work well, but so the purpose of that is to make sure that we're ready in August to invite the Catalyst community to provide reviews for us. And then in September to be able to take that feedback and finalize our work. In terms of the structure of the paper, I think we'll, as we go through each section, we'll kind of narrow down you know, what's going to go forward and what's not. But I think this audience is actually going to be it, because George and Frank were not here the last time either. So unless they have progress that we're not aware of, that those will probably have to be dropped. And
Okay.
And
Sorry.
then I'll also say I have reversed some thinking on my side in terms of what I'm going to try to take on. I had discussions with Thorsten and Steve about our own section. And what I concluded from that is that it should be focused on a good introduction, and that as the lead editor, I should lead that, writing that section. So I did work on that, and that's part of what we can review today. And I will be completing that introduction once others have made progress and I have a good clarity, so that I can write 2 to 3 sentences introducing your section of the work.
Okay, that's great. Should we go on to each paper now? Or...
Yes.
Okay, so we start with Philip.
Yeah, and as we do that, well, let's see, we could bring up the paper itself if that's helpful. Let's leave it at that for now.
Yeah, sure. I can I can either share, if you drop a link into chat, I can open it, or I could hand over host to Philip.
Let's let Philip go first. I don't think he's had a chance to put anything in the paper, so he may want to share something else
inside yet.
Yeah, so, but let's go ahead with Philip's update.
Okay. I mean, if you have something to share on screen, or I can just take notes, Philip, it's fine.
So far, I don't have something to share other than my previous update, but you have my assurances that it will be there within the next 2 or 3 days.
Oh, great. Okay, that's great. Okay, super. And can you go over again what your focus is, Philip, and what you've found so far?
Yes. So I've been reading the papers on the pros and cons of liquid democracy and vote delegation. And I'm gonna go, sorry.
I'm sorry, do you want me to?
Screen sharing threw me off.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
go ahead, don't worry. I thought because it went black, I thought the connection had some issue.
No, I've made you co-host if you want to share something, but that's fine.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
So basically, essentially, there is a couple models that people have used to study vote delegation and a few different objectives. And most of the papers have pessimistic results, which at first, reading the abstracts, this seems like a massive revelation that they've uncovered the dirty secrets of liquid democracy. But when somebody actually checks the model they have, it becomes pretty clear that under the benchmarks they've set, liquid democracy, in the worst case, will look bad. In response to this, there is a few papers that have come out recently that have sort of a critique of the critique of liquid democracy, and they're explaining why the previous modeling may be a bit inaccurate. And the worst case analysis, which is pretty standard in, at least when studying algorithms, is too pessimistic to be used here. Because, so for instance, the first very significant paper on vote delegation and liquid democracy, essentially the two properties it defines, one of them is it's called positive gain, which is how much better the outcome can be. And the other is the do no harm. And they say, well, they have a model that can also be criticized, but that's, well, I'll explain it in a bit. They say that there is no mechanism that always have positive gains and never makes a result worse. But the reason this in isolation sounds interesting, but actually what this means is that you could have a mechanism that in most cases it actually gives very good results, but there could be some case where it makes a really, really good outcome just slightly less good. But stated as properties, it seems that this mechanism has the potential to produce worse results as well as better, because they don't really go into how much better the good results are compared to no delegation and how much worse the bad ones are. So then papers started looking into it and saying, yeah, wait, hang on, like these negative results, yes, they're there, but this all means that if you have a vote that was going to go perfectly without delegation, now it's going to go almost perfectly due to delegation. So technically, yes, it became a bit worse, but the potential benefits is that a vote that would have produced a bad result without delegation could produce a better one with delegation. So essentially the way the first paper presented it was not particularly fair. The other criticism of that original paper is that the assumption was that every voter, there's two outcomes. One outcome is the correct one of the vote, and the other is the wrong one. And every voter has a chance independently of voting for the correct outcome. And also the chance of voting for the correct outcome for every voter is greater than 0.5. This is an assumption on that paper and most of the subsequent ones. The problem here is if we consider such a model, it quickly becomes clear that the more voters you have, if all of them have a greater than half chance of picking the correct outcome, the more voters you have, the higher the probability that you select the good outcome becomes, just by having more voters.
Okay.
So if you do delegation, even if the voters delegate to others who are more informed than them, because with delegation, the pool of actual voters goes down, you don't have this large number effect that guarantees that the more voters you add into the mix, the more likely it is to get the optimal outcome. Specifically, they cite various constructions that they have where essentially thousands of voters that have a 1/2 plus epsilon chance of being right, but because there's thousands of them, on average, it's way more likely that the good outcome will have more votes than the bad outcome. All of these decide to delegate to an expert who has a 0.99 chance of being right. But because so many of them delegate, in the end, that 1% chance of the expert being right turns out to be worse than having 1 million people who are just barely informed vote. And this is not a particularly realistic outcome. Like, I don't think it's fair to say that every voter has an above average chance, above half chance of being right, because this mathematically, it's almost guaranteed to give you a bad result for delegation, because the more you delegate, the more you lose these concentration bounds on the probabilities that the voters will, on average, vote in favor of the good outcome. So there's a couple papers dealing with this model and saying, you know, that liquid democracy is bad for this and that. And then there's a few other papers criticizing the first one, explaining that the first results are a bit too pessimistic, and showing that how under certain more sane circumstances, vote delegation can actually improve the outcome even with this benchmark. And specifically, there's also one very recent paper that does that for delegation, for liquid democracy with one step, rather than having delegation and redelegation.
Okay.
So basically, I'm going to include these 3 lines of work, like the original negative results, let's say, then the critique of them, and then the final thing for one-step delegation. Say a few things about what Catalyst is doing, something like that. I think.
Yeah, that sounds great. That will be a really nice contribution to this, because it gives a kind of high-level view, it sounds like, of what people have investigated, and you know, what people are documenting as potential pros and cons, and also probably documenting just the challenges of doing this kind of research and understanding exactly, you know, making forecasts of what might happen.
It sounds very practical in terms of examining what assumptions people are making and how we need to examine those assumptions, particularly. And you know, as Philip, you're saying, those kind of extreme examples. Where is there an extreme example, and what can you reasonably expect of the average voter, that kind of thing. Does anyone here
have questions for Philip?
Yeah.
I wonder how do you measure the good outcome on voting, and second is, did those papers took into account that large participation it also require a motivation, and if you focus or you stay on the direct democracy or the direct voting, then you may lose some engagement because not everybody has the same motivation and the same free time. While if you focus with some kind of delegation, then you can bring those that are motivated to participate in the voting. So maybe this can level the pros and cons of delegation and liquid democracy in comparison to direct voting.
Yes, so let me, I have an answer to both questions. So the first, about how they measure the quality of the outcome. Almost every paper has the following model. There's 2 outcomes. Let's say the good and the bad outcome. And the only thing we care about is the chance that the voters pick the good outcome. And the way they model the vote is that every voter has a probability of voting in favor of the good outcome. So let's say if there's just one voter whose probability of voting for the good outcome is 0.7, then the score, let's say, of the selection is 0.7. If we have 1 million voters with a probability 0.7 of voting for the good outcome, then it's almost certain that the good outcome will win. So this will have a score of 1 because it's because we're taking such a huge sample. It's very, very unlikely that even though everybody has a 70% chance of voting for the good thing, the bad event will happen. So that's the benchmark they're using. Just every voter chance to do the right thing. What's the chance that more than half of the voters end up, when they do their chance voting, of voting in favor of the right outcome? In terms of the engagement effort, there is only one paper that seriously tries to do this pretty much. And they do have a relationship between how much effort somebody puts in and how close to 1 their probability of voting for the right outcome becomes. And essentially, from the voter's perspective, their utility, the effort they put in to increase their chance of voting for the good outcome, is subtracted from their personal utility. And in that model, there is one like zero cost, basically, of delegating, and a non-zero cost going from 0 to 1, the more engaged the voter is when voting directly. And however, this paper, unfortunately, other than setting the model and explaining what the rules of the game are, they call this the delegation game, there isn't any serious result. Unfortunately, they show they have one sort of bad Nash equilibrium of how that vote could go. And that's pretty much it. So essentially everything else, like better delegation mechanisms or other equilibria, they leave this as future work. So other than the conceptual contribution on the model, it's not very definitive. All of this is, one downside is that this is a pretty new area. Like all these papers are from the last 5 years, maybe 10. Yeah. And the people who have written them, at least the computer scientists, most of them I've like met at conferences or things like that. And I can say for a fact that they have never actually run any election or anything remotely related to that research. So all of this is kind of with a grain of salt, what they're saying.
Well, and that's fine. And I think the part of my sort of keeping the scope realistic has been this idea that we're trying to lay out what should be measured. And it's for a later project to actually do those measurements as the dReps within Catalyst evolves. We should go on to Aaron's section
before
the time.
Just before we go on, I'll just mention, I think James Denuth of Gibbons went to something, the Commons conference in New York, and there's a lot of talk there about real world use cases, and so I think what's really interesting, what Philip just says, about the theory, that's great and all that, but there's a great opportunity here. Maybe this is also feed into the introduction, Kenric, in terms of what we're doing differently here is using these models in real world use cases. And we're using them from a pragmatic perspective. Just want to make that point, but we should move on to the next paper, I suppose, so which is the forming consensus in governance documentation.
It's a good connection, because this is what I hope that the consent will bring, with the opportunity to examine this assumption in real use cases in parallel with the work of the IO team and on the Catalyst system, the Catalyst process. And so things like that today are really practical, like editing the guidelines for a proposal assessor and other documentations that have been done, code of conduct for the circle, and many others. We can start experimenting with those different mechanisms and real uses, and then to compare it to the result of those papers and those theoretical assumptions that Philip has mentioned. We focused, I think, on other aspect of the voting, on the, let's say, how the influence, or not, maybe influence is not the right word, or the impact of the voting, okay? Because the consensus is a system for editing documents, editing agreements. So we're trying to find the right formula for determining if a suggestion is part of the document or is still in a discussion or even being denied. So this is another, I can see this as another building blocks that can be connected in the near future to the part of delegation. This we can suggest the same process for direct voting and for representative voting and for liquid democracy voting. And same on coin voting and on person voting. But this is all still in building. So until it will take a few more months. I hope till the end of the year, so we can start really experimenting with it. Right now the theoretical background is it will still be theoretical. And I hope that very soon, maybe even before the dRep will start working will start having the right to vote on Catalyst. Maybe not long afterward, we can start using those experiments on the document editing, and then it can bring us much more flexibility and freedom to experiment. While the Catalyst voting, that is very, the implementation are on the Treasury, it should be treated much more carefully, will follow suit later on according to results that we can produce from experimenting on the Consens platform. I'm not sure that the timetable will fit completely for this kind of process. I hope so, but not right now. It depends on the pace of our dev team work.
Yeah, and what I would emphasize is that, obviously your development schedule has its own pace, and there's no need or expectation that the development work would be completed for this white paper. So the white paper, it's fine for the white paper to be more of like a design plan. And also to be documenting what the challenges are, both in terms of either development challenges or, again, particularly on the idea of measuring the quality of the output or measuring the quality of the input to the process.
Exactly.
So what I would urge you to do is kind of you've got a very good outline of your section. So I would urge you over the next 2 weeks to be focused on writing the section and getting this into a narrative for the work.
Sure. We can suggest some kind of a framework for experimenting different voting mechanism and compare it to each other. We also already start working on parameter for optimization of the voting. So
okay.
this is something that Omer is start working on, and we can bring it to the white paper as well. So a parameter for optimization that can later, I hope maybe we can even add some layer of AI for this optimization process, and the framework for experimenting a different voting mechanism using the consent platform. So this is something that we can focus on the specific.
Yeah, and the other thing I would emphasize too is don't be afraid to kind of even rush through your writing to get it drafted. And I'll be helping in your section with the editorial process to get it refined. So as far as what you might call a zero draft, it can be quite rough. And then I'll work with you to refine it. And likewise, Thorsten, you know, I think it would be good for you to meet directly with Philip and provide direct support on his section. And that way too, like Philip, you've done clearly a lot of research. I would urge you this week, you know, as you said, you're going to try to do it in the next couple of days, to kind of think of it as a zero draft, put your thoughts in writing, and then Thorsten can take some time to help edit it and get it more refined.
Okay.
Because what I'd like, and this is up to you, Philip, but and you need to check, Thorsten, that you're comfortable with the topic. But as long as you're comfortable, Philip, my recommendation is Thorsten be a co-author of your section.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And then I'm going to be a co-author of Aaron's section, and also Steph and I have just discussed this week by email that I'll also be co-authoring his section, and as he goes through his review, we can explain a little bit more of that. In fact, now's maybe, well, let's see, does anyone have questions for Aaron?
I would just add in the meanwhile that I think for framing the different aspect of the specific white paper, so Philip and you would bring the more academic background and the references to set the ground for this research, and I will suggest that this will be maybe a little bit more practical aspect of this paper, of how we can continue optimize and continue work in more practical manners in the near future.
Yes, and I think that's good. Yeah, you know, because your work is kind of, you know, how do you produce outcomes from this process, in specifically outcomes in the term of good documentation. So that will be very helpful. All right, let's segue to Steph's section on the voting power. And
yeah, so I added some notes into the white paper, basically just saying that, you know, calculating a hands-off power index is easy in simplified settings, and then tailoring it to fit the nuance of Project Catalyst is more interesting and more complex of a problem. Some of the things we're limited by is like the available data, which can be available by request. Some is not available because of that's where we're at in the current, like which wallet is voting for which proposals. We're not yet privy to that data. But from my side of things, I think Kenric and I were troubleshooting the working definition we had in Wolfram language, and I think the author Seth Chandler, who does not work for Wolfram, is a kind of a friend of the company, has a slightly different definition of what the bands-off power index is. So we were not expecting some of the results that we were getting. I've communicated with him. He said he's gotten tied up a little bit, but I do expect an answer from him hopefully soon. I don't have an exact date. And then I have a different team within Wolfram looking through who don't know anything about bands off index, but looking through that definition to technically understand if we're forgetting something or not. And and then a few of them happened to get sick this week. So that meeting's gotten pushed back from Monday to Friday of this week. But in terms of writing out the details of like some of the difficulties and some of the, just establishing the narrative and why we want to do it and what's some of the obstacles and frictions, I think is totally doable. And so Kenric, when you get a chance and see some of those notes, if you say this is kind of the scope of it, we can expand here or not, then I'll go from there.
So Steph, is it like an exposition of bands off, pros and cons, and then running it through some relevant data?
Yeah, I mean, we I think so. And I think we can obviously do the calculation for a simple example to make it specific to Catalyst. I think we need to wait until that definition, the technical definition that I have in code is agreed upon, or at least I know how to work it, and then start to layer in some of the more interesting parts of what we do know about, like wallets, and then filtering some of that into the calculation.
I have a comment in itself, kind of like, do you think it would be feasible to define requirements against voting data to have a more meaningful processing according to the Banzhaf index?
Requirements, did you say?
Yeah, so kind of like, because Charles is talking about moving all of this onto main chain, which kind of may take some of the obstacles away.
Right. Yeah.
And I think I'm just wondering whether that in itself would satisfy then all requirements to be able to process, or if there are further ones which would help and support to do an analysis. And if so, if you would be able to name them, because then that could be a direct input also, in the sense of to be able to run this power index analysis. This is the ideal data set which we would expect, and this is where we are right now, or this is what we need additionally to make it more efficient.
Yeah, I think that's possible. And I think at least for the we'll know every wallet that voted and what its size is. We don't need to know the identity, that's fine. We'll know which wallet voted for which proposal. I would assume, that's what would be known. Now, I'm not saying I know that for sure.
I'm not sure, I would, the way I would answer that question is the following. I could envision, if we make further progresses and can develop it, that, Catalyst maybe for every round has a definition of, what wallets are voting and what the size of that wallet is and whether they delegated or not, and, to who they delegated and what the size of that wallet is. And then from there, that's all that's needed theoretically to calculate the Banzhaf power index for each wallet. However, given there's a question, given the number of participants, which is in the tens of thousands, there is some computational cost to doing that calculation, and we don't know yet how large that cost is, but presumably if it's important to the community, that could be done. And I actually think that in a sense, the benefit could be that part of the feedback to every wallet holder is, this is the percentage of influence you had on the outcome. Now, the second step as to what the actual outcome is and the mapping between what voter voted on which project, right now that data is possibly available, but again, very hard to organize. At least it's available for some rounds. But I know there was some activity last year to add some cryptographic layers to the voting to keep that secret. And there are trade-offs on the privacy issues.
Kenric, are you saying that, well, I want to respond about the combinatorial thing. Yeah, so do you think we need, let's say there's 50,000 voting wallets. Obviously, like in a bands off index, one of those wallets could vote by itself, and then one with 2, and then one with 2 and 3, and one with 2, 3, and 50,000.
Yeah.
And then there could be 2 with 3 and 2 to 50,000, and then all of those, right? That's an overwhelming amount of like computational, like, yeah, that's going to require some computational power to determine that.
Yeah.
But does it matter if half of those wallets don't vote for a specific proposal, and so then they're omitted in that calculation? So I'm imagining not all 50,000 vote for every single proposal, yes or no.
Right. Yeah, there's tricks to it. And as I said, so in my comment just then, I'm kind of reaching out to what's possible. But as we've discussed, there are intermediate steps where you can simplify this dramatically and still get useful results. So I'm interested in that as well.
Totally.
So exactly what the feedback would be and exactly how we do the simplification and what the assumptions are made, we can work on that. But maybe the broader point is just one nice outcome, if we can achieve it, would be the ability to give back to each voter some measure of the amount of influence they have in the process.
I think that would be great. What's the logistics of that one? I just want to talk through it just so that.
Well, maybe in a separate meeting, we can talk through the logistics of exactly what assumptions we should make. We don't have to do that right now.
Right.
That was a good update, and maybe we can, does anyone have questions for Steph on his work?
Do you see that as a kind of a practical outcome, Kenric, that kind of percentage, like a service that we provide from our paper that, look, here's a way of using Steph's approach to give some kind of practical assessment of, because there's all this debate about plutocratic voting, my vote doesn't count, all this kind of stuff. Is it kind of?
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, what we'll be able to do, I think, is to define how to do that. And then, hopefully this may motivate work both at Wolfram and some other groups to actually implement something that people could use.
We are motivated to do that, and we're motivated to have everyone here that's been adding and to have input and have their, like how can we make this so that the collective brain is included in it? I think understanding like the power distribution is huge, and you guys have direct access to helping me directly figure out how to implement that. So I'm all ears. as well.
Yeah. Okay, very good. I'd like to talk a little bit about the editorial process. And Thorsten, could you do the following with the draft that we have? We have kind of preliminary. So maybe I'll go ahead and share my screen as I talk through this. That'll be easier.
Do you have host?
I do. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be fun. So in terms of where the paper is now, editorial things you can help with, Thorsten, are the following. I'd like to get an image that sort of somehow represents Catalyst and voting and liquid democracy, or some combination of those things. So if you could try to find a good image for us to use, or if someone in their research comes across a good image that they recommend, then that would be nice too.
I just had one come to mind. The catalyst symbol is those kind of surrounding dots,
Yeah,
circles. Be interesting if we could add like a voting symbol into each one of those
that's a
dots
nice idea.
or
Yeah.
circles to indicate that there's a voting process or there's a human there or something.
I don't know how artistic you are, Thorsten, but I think Steph's given a great idea if you want to try to work on it. In
Yeah.
other words, you could start with the Cardano symbol, and then you could add lines kind of showing people delegating to each other, and how the community is connected as a network. That's a good idea. Thanks, Steph. Okay. So if you could do the following stuff. In the introduction, I'm using heading 1 for the title and then heading 2 for the authors. Could you do the same for every section so that people know where to put their input? And then all of the note-taking that we've done can still stay in the document, but it'll be at the end now. And maybe we can even just like do something like the following, where this is notes, and then this becomes heading 2. So we don't necessarily need to either lose this or put it in a separate document yet. Eventually, all the notes will come out and be a separate document, but for now, I think it's still helpful to have it all in one place. But if you can add all of the sections now that we have, and also add a conclusion that, again, the editors will work on and others will contribute to. And then the other thing to let you all know of, I decided to put it off 1 week, but Thorsten and I are going to hold an after town hall discussion to go over our progress on the paper and to recruit reviewers. I think we'll do that either next week or at the latest the following week. So we'll be trying to get it together for next week. I didn't want to do it this week because we still don't really have drafts yet, but if you can kind of work on getting a first draft done, that'll give a better context for giving the community an update on our progress and recruiting the reviewers to provide comments on the work. The other editorial thing is the following, Thorsten. I saw you invited me to a new Zotero group. I don't want to make a new group because we already have a group where the literature is being collected. I want to use the same group that we were using from the last fund.
I can include everyone in that. I just wanted to keep it separate so that more or less kind of stuff which is allocated for this project, which we need for the literature review, or kind of the stuff which comes in because people are now looking at different papers.
Yeah, so let me explain why I don't want a separate group for that. And let
Okay.
me share my screen on that. Hold on a second.
Yeah, that'd be useful because I was interested in that issue as well. So,
Yeah, so let me bring this up now. So the way Zotero works, you can make these different group libraries, which we've done. And we have this one on DAO governance that we're all a member of. And if anyone here isn't a member of, let me know. You should be. I don't mind if I can work on getting you to be like an owner of the group or have some sort of more editorial control, Thorsten. But it's important that this continue to be the database that we're all using. And we
That's
can make
fine.
new.
It's just we have to kind of also consider that when we have to put the literature at the end of the document, we're not kind of carrying all the weight of stuff which no one has ever looked at.
You don't have to do that. So the way then, but this is something to work on. I can, well, we're getting close to the end of our meeting, but there is an issue. I would like you to test this out more in terms of working with Google Docs, because in my experience, and if I get more time, I'll look into it again more myself, but try it yourself. You should be able to, you're not going to put all of these, the database is going to be big, but then when you go to write your document, the process that you follow is to insert particular articles into the document. And then that builds your bibliography for the paper.
That's fine. Let me try that out. It's not a problem. I can move everyone effectively to the DAO governance group and just get rid of the other one again. So
get rid of the other one.
That's him.
Double check that everyone's a member.
And if you could share practical updates to that asynchronously by email or Discord. So because, well, as you say, Cameron, we're coming to the end of the meeting, and it would be good to have even a few minutes just without recording. So I'll just sort of wind things down a bit. If anyone has any other business that wants to go on the recording, I can put that now. I'll just say for my part, I apologize in advance for not being able to get too involved in the editorial authorship process. My focus is on documenting these meetings and project managing everything. So, but of course, I will provide assistance where required at the end of the process, Kenric, as well. So,
yeah, that's totally fine. That makes sense.
Because it's a lot of work documenting all this.
I know that was also why I kind of reversed. Last week I was sort of hesitant to take the lead on the introduction section, but as I thought through all of our responsibilities, it's appropriate for me to do that.
Yeah,
so
but we are getting good feedback on that. People are finding it useful, even though it's quite a niche audience for what we discuss here. People are appreciating what are these discussions and the fact we tweet about it. So thank you everyone for participating, because there's a lot of a very rich resource of discussion here. And thank you. I'll just stop the recording now.